first thing is to say good to see everyone back again, especially those that have made the effort to come back to see part 2, because as you all know, through here we were a bit ambitious the first time and went well beyond what I thought we'd be able to get into the session. Today is a continuation, looking at the Cham Kill form, linking the ideas from both Sin and Cham Kill so you can get a better appreciation of what the two forms have to offer. What I didn't do last time was to go through Sin and Cham form first of all so you could see it. So with this particular one, what I'll do is go through the form straight away. I think what stopped me from doing that last time was just about everyone in the room was very familiar with the Sin and Cham form, whereas maybe not everyone's as familiar with the Cham Kill form. There's always a chance that you might not know the whole form completely. So it's a good way to start, is to actually look at the form, and then as I break it down, it'll make a bit more sense. So to begin with, I'll just run through it at about the pace that I was always told was a good pace to practice at. Sifu always reminded us not to practice the forms too quickly, that they were for your personal development, not for an audience. So you don't have to try and go super fast to impress anybody, and you shouldn't be thinking about power and all those sort of things. Just good technique and a steady, even pace all the way through. Cham Kill form starts off exactly like Sin and Cham form with all the same opening movements, because it's setting up the same basic parameters of the stance and the center line. So the opening parts of the form are exactly the way that you open Sin and Cham. But from there onwards, everything starts to change. And movement is the most obvious difference, because of course in the first form we're not moving at all. In this one there's various kinds of motion, starting with pivoting and eventually with stepping and also the introduction of kicking. The first section of the Cham Kill form is like the first section of Sin and Cham. It's probably the most important section and the one that contains the most information. So you need to make sure that you really digest the first section, and when you play it as a soft section. It's not about power, but it's about using the other person's energy. So you're not building up and winding up your own superpowered actions, but more going with what you would imagine is your opponent's energies. And that's why you shouldn't see this one being done rushed. A lot of people in other lineages of Wing Chun play this part very, very quickly and try to put all their body behind it. That goes against what the techniques are actually trying to show you. And I'll try to make that abundantly clear as we progress through the breakdown. The second section is where we first see the kicking and the stepping. Now, of course, when we practice in class, we do all the stepping and the kicking as separate entities so that we can train them individually. But in the traditional times of learning Wing Chun, a lot of the students wouldn't have even seen how to step or kick until such time as they were taught Cham Kill. So this would be, for a lot of people in the past, the very first introduction to that aspect of the system. In modern era, we're lucky that we actually take our time to break things down and develop individual skills even before we've necessarily done the forms. And the form then just becomes a convenient place to bundle it all together for an overall training session. The bong saw is a featured technique in Cham Kill form. In the first form, you only saw it once, right towards the end, as an introduction to how bong saw works, so that you've got an ability to learn how to chi sao, because we need bong saw technique for chi sao practice. But in this form, the bong saw gets 3 interpretations, or 3 applications, if you like, to make sure that the student realises the full potential of what bong saw can do. Now, I'll get to that in time, but as per last time, I want to go through it step by step, technique by technique, and help you to see what things are trying to show you. Clearly, we don't really need to say anything about the stance, because we've already talked about that in the first session. And likewise, we're setting up the centre line both vertically and horizontally. That's already been discussed too. So we'll go straight into the opening movements of the first section, which involve double Cham sao action. Both hands, both elbows, in fact, thrusting towards the centre. We have, in fact, 3 different types of Cham sao in this system. In the first form, we get introduced to the first one in the second section of the form. Later on, we get the second application, which is this short action from the third section of Sin and Cham form. We would call those, for want of a simpler term, Type 1 and Type 2 Cham sao. What we have in Cham Kill is Type 3 Cham sao, where the elbow is actually being thrust forwards. Now, a key difference between this form and the Sin and Cham form is that in Cham Kill form, virtually all the way through, you're doing 2 actions at once, but you're not going to use two actions at once. They're all being done together for the purpose of balance and to make sure that you don't favour one side of the body more than the other. So you're never going to use double jumps up. Right, if there's a punch coming down here, I'll use this one to send it away. And if there's one coming down the other side, I'll use this one. Even if a person was throwing two punches at once, which is pretty unlikely, there would be no need to use two jumps up. One could take care of both of those techniques. So never ever presume that the techniques in the form will be used exactly as they're done in the form. That is a mistake that occurs in Wing Chun quite often. And if you apply that thinking to Cham Kill, you really misunderstand the system, because Cham Kill is not about applying two hands at once in the same actions. Right? Simply training them. Now, why do we have this jump style? Well, it might well be that we've not got ourselves properly set for our opponent when an attack comes. We might have only just barely started thinking about, hey mate, I don't want any trouble, trying to back him down, and he launches. So what I've got to be able to do is put something between me and the other person. The ideal situation would be to hit. So if I can borrow Ben, that's my first partner. The ideal thing would be if Ben throws a punch at me, to be throwing a punch back. But we're not always going to be that prepared. It might well be that I get caught a little bit off guard. So all I can do is manage to put something between us, and then maybe I'll have the chance to follow up. As a classical way of understanding it, if Ben launched one long punch at me, I could use this one to control the first punch. If he did another one, I could use it again, and by now I've got my footwork happening, I've got my head switched on properly, then I can start returning fire. Ideally, you won't use this jump style too often because you should be trying to hit the guy. But as an emergency, if you like, it's there to remind you that if somebody's attacking me, the first thing I'll do is put something between us. So by sinking the elbow, I can't miss the arm. Because of course I don't know exactly where that's going. It could be anywhere between here and here. And if I start pushing the hand out, I might catch it at a weak moment and get pushed through, or I might get there too early and actually miss. So the golden rule is like the same one we established in the first form with this sinking jump style, that if we use the elbow as the guide, wherever the elbow goes, the hand will follow. And I can't go lower than my elbow. So I won't therefore miss the attack. And of course from there you can see it's very, very close to the next weapon. Now, if I keep Ben here, because the next movement follows on, although not directly. It's not that you have to do the next move straight after this one, but it does help explain the basis to it. If I have done this action, and I've managed to cut off that first attack, and Ben withdraws that hand, maybe he's going to come around here and try and hit me again, or perhaps he's going to throw the other hand. Now what most people would do instinctively is chase it, so if it went out that way, they'd then start blocking that one. Or if you took that away and threw that one, they'd then start chasing this one. Now of course we've already established in our training right at the start, we don't want to chase hands. So this movement, the jump style, is followed immediately by what we refer to in our lineage as Cham Kill Bilsal. In other words, the thrusting hands from Cham Kill form. And what it's teaching me to do is the moment that I lose contact here, if Ben removes that for any reason, I go forward. I don't start looking for his next hand, I go for the head. The other hand's always here to cover me just in case he's going down this side, but I'm looking to hit something. So, thanks Ben. So as a reference point, what we do is from the jump style position, you should shoot the hands up to about the height of your own eyes or eyebrows. You'll see a lot of other people in Wing Chun, they'll play the first one roughly the same as us, but then they'll go downwards. Right? You don't want to go down because you're leaving a gap. So from the jump style position, it actually goes up as it goes forwards. And you notice the hands are completely neutral. Just like Futsal in the first form, I'm training the handle. I'll put the weapon on later. I don't know what I need to use yet, so I'm not worrying about the actual tool at the end. I'm just getting the handle primed. This is the same. This Cham Kill Futsal, like the Futsal in the first form, is training the handle, which is the delivery system. The weapon I'll worry about later on. It could be that I close my hand into a fist. It could be that I leave it open as a palm strike, horizontally or vertically. It might be that I'll turn it over and chop, or I'll come in with the inside of the thumb and the index finger and go for a throat, or a finger jab. It's also quite possible it could become an eye jab, particularly with the thumb. It's the preferred way that we use for taking eyes. So in the actual application of the form, once I've done the jump style, I'm simply shooting the hands forward and keeping them loose so that they can change to whatever they need to change to. So I'm not committing myself to one particular technique, I'm leaving it open. As soon as we've done the Cham and the Bill, what we do now, Cham kill, Bill Sal goes forward. Did I call it Fook Sal before? I meant to call it Bill Sal, my apologies. What we do then is drop the hands back into a familiar position. This is the Lancel that we've seen all the way through the first form, and we're seeing it again here. Lancel being to put a barrier between the person in front of us and ourselves. Again, while we're doing two hands, we'll probably use one or the other if we ever need to use the Lancel position at all. But by putting the two of them there, it's now keeping me very square and aware of my posture, so that when I do the first pivot and turn to my side, I'm making sure I'm keeping my body even, because if I only do one, I might end up offline. So by putting both elbows there, it's keeping me aware of my posture. More importantly, it's this elbow that's doing the work. I'm actually imagining that I'm taking this elbow, my right elbow, and driving it forwards. So it's not that I'm spinning around, which would miss the bag, I'm actually driving forwards. So I'm knocking the power towards my opponent's position rather than past their position. Now this is the first time that we do what is a feature of this form, and that is Chi Sao specific exercises. You might recall, if you were here in the first part of the presentation on Sifu, I said that in the Cham Kill form, a lot of what we do is Chi Sao specific. That is, it's designed to help you understand principles that apply when you start rolling. And of course, in traditional times, as I've mentioned in the previous presentation, you may not learn how to move around and apply these things before you start doing Chi Sao. And it's through Chi Sao you learn to do the sort of combinations that are natural to Wing Chun. So the form is coming at an appropriate time in your training program, whereby you can relate it to your Chi Sao straight away. Now, this action is referred to as Peterson. Peterson literally means hacking with the elbows. It's not meant to be an elbow strike as in trying to hit someone in the head. It's actually more aimed towards the midsection and the chest area, collecting the arms or anything else that's in the way at the same time. But primarily the name still gives you the wrong impression, because it makes it sound like we're trying to actually hit with the elbow. In fact, what we're really trying to do is control the other person's means of getting through our centre line. I'm not going to Roger. Most of you have done Chi Sao before, you'll recognise a situation like this. You're rolling with your partner and you start to realise there's a lot of energy going this way. They're just pushing so strongly with their Tan Sao that it's knocking you out of the centre line. If you try to struggle with that, they'll beat you, because we all know that the Tan Sao is naturally very strong compared to Fook Sao. So an answer to the situation is that when he does push that way, you trap his two hands with one of yours. This is now the same action that we've just done in the form. Because if I get Roger to move away and I stay where I am, there it is. It's exactly the way that I've just done it in the form, right down to the angle. Because if I don't turn all the way, some people look at us, oh, you're never going to turn that far. Well, here's a situation in point where you do. Because if he pushes through there and I only turn part of the way, Roger can still drive forwards and take my balance. But if I turn all the way through, anywhere he goes now, I can control him. He's now feeling quite vulnerable. And if he tries to struggle out of it, what I do is shift out the way and I can still start hitting straight away, because he's now facing the wrong opponent. He's not facing me. So this is a situation where the form and your Chi Sao are working together. So there's a literal application straight away that you can practice in your training. As an extension to that, Peijang also serves the purpose of, if I'm in too close to use my hands properly, I can use the elbow to make a bit of space or to do some damage. The reason we say it's not a headshot is because at this kind of range, while elbows are very dangerous, he can still move his head out of the way. And the elbow has now lost its range and leaves me exposed. But what he can't do at this range is move his body out of the way. So I'm going to hit something, whether it's his bicep or his tricep or his chest or even his back. I'll be hitting something, so no matter how much he tries to pull his head out of the way, it won't matter, because he's still going to get hit. And what it will do is give me some room to get my hands out. Where initially, I might be completely bottled up. I can't get my hands out. So I can generate a lot of power through the hip, through the elbow, to now make a space where I can hit or escape. So we don't think of this as, oh, here we are, we're in combat and I'm going to rush in and try to do that. Too easy to shut down. But if I am already in a position where I can't use the techniques I want, that might give me just enough room to get out. but it's coming from around the waist. It's not coming from your shoulders, because if I use the shoulders only, it's really jammed up. If I try and just use the shoulder, it won't work. But the moment I put the whole body into it, it's very, very strong. You can feel the difference. Right, thanks, Roger. So when you're doing this action in the form, we do 3 times. The first one is the application. The very first one, no wind up, just turning on the spot, is the application which we've just been looking at. You notice I didn't go back first and then forward. You will see a lot of people in Wing Chun, they do that. They wind it up. They actually make the technique go upwards. Right, the idea is to keep your body as still as you can and just whip it around in one smooth line. The second and the third one is more to learn to control your own centre of balance. So you learn not to throw yourself off balance. Quite literally, I don't want to be going and fall over. That's of no advantage to me. So first one, application. Second and third, learning how to generate hip energy and control where your power's going, so you don't get yourself into trouble. Like most things in Wing Chun, we do 3 of the important applications. It reminds us why we're doing it. It makes us take it seriously. It gives you an extra opportunity to think about the technique. So in this form, the same thing happens as in the first form. Important things happen 3 times, all the way through the system. Finishing up from the Peterson, the elbow hacking position, we then open up into, this is what I used the name for before incorrectly, this is our Cham kill fuksal. Right. A lot of other systems will just push it sideways, or they'll extend it all the way out. Whereas what you'll see is, as I'm doing it from the side on purpose so you can see it, it's coming in slightly and then expanding forwards and outwards. If you look from the front, my hands are actually turning away. You might recall when we talked about sin and toe, I talked about directing energy. That if I point where I want the hand to go, it's more likely to get there than if I just bluntly try to force my way through. So by guiding the energy of the technique, I can get more power. This is a case in point. When I do this action, what I'm trying to do is drive my energy away from the centre. The number 1 application for this technique, the most useful application, is against round attacks, where Tansal may not be the ideal technique for a lot of us because we're not strong enough in the arms, or perhaps shorter than our opponent, or our timing might be out, so we get there a little bit too late and therefore the bomb can collapse. When you turn the hand over into this shape, it has a very important function. It shuts down the natural action of the bicep, which is, of course, is to pull the arm in. As soon as you turn the hand over in this shape, the bicep gets neutralised and the tricep takes over completely, which means that the arm is very, very strong from frontal pressure. So for a person who's smaller and lighter, this will offer a stronger way of defending against heavy punches that come in circles. So application of the first kind is against exactly that sort of attack. Enzo, if I can borrow you. So in other words, if Enzo is launching an attack from a circular pattern, as he comes around, this shape, doesn't matter if it slips off there, I'm quite happy with that because it still hasn't really done some damage compared to what I'm doing, because I'm making contact here. I'm never going to stand there and just do that. That alone won't do anything to Enzo, so he's free to attack again. Boom. The second one will be the damaging one. So this may not completely connect his technique, but the important thing is he gets hit. That's always our goal, to launch an attack. But you'll see if I get him to push on that, this can remain in place very, very easily, yet it's completely relaxed. Doesn't matter how much energy he puts on that, it's very, very strong. The worst that will happen is I'll get moved, but this doesn't collapse. Whereas with the Tansal, I've been doing the Tansal for a very long time, it still has a tendency to lift me up out of my stance. So for me and for people who have built similar to myself, you might find this as a more useful application. Another way that we use this one, I'll do it around this way so I don't work the bad shoulder. If I'm trapped inside in this sort of position, Enzo's driving down this way and he's got me caught here. If we try to push back that way, it won't get him off. So as he's pushing this way and I push that way, I won't really move him very far. He can easily close that down. But if I take this Cham kill fuksal action and just slightly change the angle, it turns him off the centre line. So instead of forcing from the shoulder, which will have very little effect, I use the elbow and the hip, and I can get my centre back, and then I can come back through this way. So again, there's a second way that we can use the technique. If you're playing lapsal with your opponent, We're going through the lapsal drill. When I'm in here, it's that shape that I'm using to attack with. So if I decide I want to come through the middle, by starting that action, it starts to weaken his position, after which I can trap and control. So there's another way that we can use it straight away. Right? And if you're rolling with your opponent and you want to get his hands off the centre line, another method is to use this one, what some people call underlap, lapsal from below. So you literally turn that off to the side so that you can attack from here. So there's already 3 ways that we can interpret one very simple movement, and it's quite effective in all 3 situations. Right, so when you're playing it in the form, make sure you don't bring your arms back to yourself, because you would imagine if I bring my arms back, that lets my opponent in. I keep the point of contact and re-angle, redirect. So I'm keeping the point of contact, imagining where my opponent's arms are sitting on my arms, bringing the elbows in to get the body behind them, and then going slightly forwards and slightly outwards, so that I'm sending their energy away to my left or to my right. If you see people just doing it sideways, they've misunderstood it. If you see people just shooting it forwards, they've misunderstood it. It's a combination of both. It's going forwards and it's going slightly out to the side. Now up to there, it's all double actions, but then we do something that becomes a single action. We turn the hands over, not to do a tansao as such, but like in the first form, as you might remember, in the second section, we do the Cham, turn the hands over in order to practice the ja. Right, we're turning it over to exaggerate the action, to fully appreciate what this motion is doing. Similar things happen here. I do the fook, I turn the hands over to fully appreciate this action. This is a combination of 2 techniques we've already learned in the first form. The dai jiao at the end of the 3rd section, where we do bong, tan and push forward, and the jutsu that I was just talking about. We combine them together to make a technique that Sifu would refer to as jitsao. It's the same ji as in Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee's name for his fighting system. When he used it, he was using it with the interpretation of intercept. The more traditional translation of the word ji is to snap or to break or to cut. So when we say jitsao, what we're doing is we're using it as a damaging action to the opponent's elbow. What we're anticipating is an arm break or a dislocation or a hyperextension of the elbow. Now, it's not a technique that you want to be trying to use to catch punches. It's not for that. But if you're at a position where your opponent's already extended a limb or left his arm out in a vulnerable position, it is a place where you might be able to use this one. I remember my Sifu told a very funny story years ago that he had never used this technique, done it for years and years in the form, but he'd never done it himself in application. So he really didn't know what its potential was. And in fact, he was wondering if it actually would work. Didn't even think that it might actually work in combat. He was in Canada. He had one very, very memorable trip to Canada where he was teaching. And during that stay, he did a seminar to a class of Wing Chun people on Cham Kill. And during the course of the seminar, he got them working this technique with partners so they could get a feel for it. Apparently, a day or 2 afterwards, one of the students who attended the seminar got into trouble because he was at a nightclub or a bar or something similar, and he was grabbed by one of the security staff. They thought he was messing around, maybe he was, I didn't get all the details, I don't think Sifu did either. But in the process of the guy trying to reach out and grab him, this kid instinctively applied the technique and dislocated the guy's elbow. So Sifu used to smile and say, from that moment onwards, I knew it actually could work. Right? So he discovered through someone else's practice the potential of the technique. But there's a catch to it, it's a very important consideration. Ben, can you jump over here? And that is, if you do it on the wrong side, it won't work. Now, what's basically implied by that is, say it's Ben's right arm, let's say instead of just throwing punches, because I'm not going to stand here and do that, but he might have been putting his hand on my chest, grabbing my shirt, or giving me the shove or the finger routine, and I've decided I don't want to hit this guy, but I would like to take some sort of control. Well, the way it will work for me is with my left arm, which is directly opposite his right arm, is the lifting hand, and my right arm acts as the snapping hand. Already he started to flinch because he can feel what's happening. It may not necessarily break anything in here, but it's certainly very uncomfortable, and it will make a person try to pull away, in which case if you do want to continue control, it lends itself to elbow locks and wrist locks and all that sort of thing. But if he's unlucky enough to want to leave his hand there, then it could potentially, done with power and with speed, cause some significant damage. At the very least, it'll probably make the arm go quite numb for a few seconds, and he's not going to be able to hit you with it. So he's going to have one arm less than you've got. But if I do the wrong way, which would be to do it this way, Ben can easily bend his elbow and get out of it. So it fails. So it's very, very important that you look into, if you're going to use the technique, to quickly scan the situation and make sure you're coming from the outside. If you've got this hand forward, it needs to be that way and not this way. That will fail. He can get out of it just by bending. But this way, even if he tries to bend it, it doesn't matter. You can still control. You've got 2 points of contact and you can start pretending you're a Manchester United star and kicking goals. Right? Or dropping in a knee or whatever you want to do. Running into the footpath and dislocate his shoulder if you want to. The potential is endless once you've got that sort of control, if you'd rather not hit the guy. Right? But for goodness sake, don't ever see yourself standing there, a guy throwing punches, and you're trying to catch his hands and break his elbows. That is not going to work. It doesn't lend itself to that at all. If you've seen Way of the Dragon with Bruce Lee, he actually used this technique against Chuck Norris, but modified it. Remember that Chuck Norris, being a karate guy, was punching this way. Now, if Ben is throwing a punch like that, the elbow is now pointing this way. So doing this is not really going to affect him very much. So you change it a little bit. And that's what happens in Enter the Dragon. There's a sequence where Chuck's up against a wall and he tries to throw a punch. If you know the film well, you remember the sequence in the Colosseum. And as the punch comes out, Bruce did a snapping action, which was basically just the same movement. And then I think he did something to his knee and dislocated his knee as well. So Chuck's left there limping off the wall with one hand and one leg. A memorable moment for Chuck Norris. So what Bruce was demonstrating there was that this is versatile. You've got to be able to modify it. And it's not unique to Wing Chun. Thanks, Ben. Tai Chi and a lot of other martial arts have similar actions. In Tai Chi, they give it the very poetic name of playing the pipa. Pipa is like a Chinese lute, like a guitar. And in Tai Chi, they play it like this. And it looks all very nice, but it's exactly the same thing. You're taking someone's elbow and you're trying to cause some harm to the elbow joint. So we do it 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Making sure that you're dragging this elbow and forearm in as you're lifting the other palm up and forwards. If you see it being done like this, or like this, pointless. It's got to have an element that is as similar as possible to the application, which is lifting and dragging. Right, as soon as we've done that, we then move on to a really significant part of the form, of this section at least. And that is we start to understand the process by which we can hit a moving target. And we do that by hitting across the body. Right, so if I'm facing towards you, I'm not doing here and then here and then here again, always in the middle. I'm actually going out to the left, out to the right, and out to the left again before I withdraw the final one. Now, what that does, you might recall we talked last time about circle steps and how they can be implied as a circle is always beaten by a straight line. This is another example of an abstract idea being transposed to a simple movement in the form with the hope that you'll pick it up and realise what's going on. If I stand completely square and turn to my left and put my right hand out in front of me on the centre line, as I understand the centre to be visually from the middle of my body, and then keep that position stiffly held and turn back to the centre, you'll now see that there's a gap of several inches between where my fist is and where my actual centre is. Whereas if I make the same change of posture and put my fist in front of my shoulder, lock that position and come back, my fist is now in the middle. Now what that's demonstrating is that the moment you change from square to any position past square, the parameters involved in the angle of the punch change to the point where the punch can be at least that far off centre line. Now in simple terms what it means is if you're trying to hit a moving target, you have to allow for the motion. You can't turn and then shoot, because by the time I turn and then shoot, my opponent has probably shifted again. It's taken me 2 actions, he's had time to do 2 actions. But if I can learn to turn as I shoot, then what will happen is that my hand technique will arrive at the same destination as my opponent in the same moment. Another way of looking at it is like when you have a bicycle and you stand it upside down. You might have punctured the tyre, so you're repairing the tyre. It's something I used to always do when I was younger. And if you spin the wheel while the bike's upside down, of course it spins quite freely. And you can end up being very, very mesmerised by watching the hub or the edge of the wheel, and you'll notice that the hub is going round and round and round, but apparently it seems to be quite slow. Yet if you watch out to the rim is moving very, very quickly. So the spokes that are connecting the hub at the closest point to the hub of the wheel are moving at a slow pace, but out here they're moving at a much faster rate. Now what I'm doing when I'm playing this action is I'm the hub and I'm using the spokes to reach a point on the rim, so that when the rim gets to that place, I'm already there. So I've always really, in my mind, I've always related it to that idea. You might have another idea that works better for you. Consider some things from your own personal experience that might be able to click into that idea for you. The other way of thinking about it is, we've got a professional photographer here today who will appreciate this straight away, and the rest of us have all had our go at taking pictures when we've been growing up as kids to adults. And when we're kids, we don't really think too clearly about these things. We see, oh, there's a fast car, I want to get a picture, and we go click, and the car whizzes by, and we get the photos back, think it's going to be a beautiful photograph of a fancy car, and it's a blur. Because you pointed the camera at a moving object, and so the camera couldn't cope for the speed of the object. The shutter speed wasn't quick enough, or whatever else. But if, as we get smarter, we think about it, and we pan with the moving vehicle, we can get a rather reasonably crisp or rather crisp image, because we've allowed for the speed. Right, another simple idea. If you're at Luna Park and you're having a go at the air guns, trying to shoot the ducks as they go across, you've probably tried it. If you shoot at the duck, you won't hit the duck. But if you can allow the right amount of distance between the duck and where you're aiming, chances are the pellet will reach the duck just as the duck comes into that point on the movement. And therefore you've predicted accurately where the duck will be, so you hit it. Now in fighting it's exactly the same. I've got to have a predictable way of knowing where my opponent is going to be. An accurate way of knowing roughly how to get to his point of contact. So what I always do is I think of it this way. When I stand completely square on, if I spread my arms out to about 45 degrees either side of centre, that's approximately as far as my opponent can get in one step. In any one natural step, I can move that far to my left, or I can move that far to my right, which equates to about that much of a distance. Now, when I turn, there's that position being represented across my body. So I'm realising that if I'm here and he moves that way, if I go no further than about 45 degrees off centre, we should probably coincide. And if I move out this way about the same amount, we'll also probably coincide. So what Cham Kill, remember the name Cham Kill is called looking for, searching for, and by extension it's also finding the bridge. You're finding the connection. So what I'm trying to do is teach myself how to hit a moving target. Sinantal form was hitting a stationary target. Target was stuck on the wall and I could stand and punch it, I could sit down and punch it, I could lie down and punch it, I could do whatever I like because the target's not going anywhere. But now the target is shifting, and more importantly, so am I. So I have to take into account there are now 3 dimensions to worry about, not just one. And that's what we're doing when we play these actions. We're considering motion and time and the depth and shape of movement that our opponent and ourselves are going through. So, best way to show you how it works, if Roger comes up again, is if we start off directly in front of each other, and I'll allow him to do 2 things. I want him to try to take 2 steps to the right or 2 steps to the left, and I'll do the wrong way, which is he takes his first step, I turn, he takes his second step, I punch, he's already gone. Because he's had time to get out of the way, because I saw him move, oh, he's moving, now I hit him, and he's out of range. He's shifted one way or the other. But if I've taught myself that when Roger moves, I hit, we arrive there at the same time. Now what I'm doing is I'm no longer using my centre as the gun side. I've now changed it to my elbow. So when he moves, I shoot via the elbow. If he tries to run the other way, wasn't even looking and I got him. Because his movement distance is now predictable. I can expect to know where he'll be, and therefore I'll probably hit something. Even if I don't hit square on, I'll hit something because I'm allowing, by using the elbow, I'm allowing for his arrival point. And if he tries to run again, any direction, I can allow for it. So I can chat to you and still throw the punch and I'm still landing on his chin. And he's starting to worry now that I control it. Thanks, Roger. So although that's sort of hidden in there, and I think a lot of people in Wing Chun have no idea that that's actually what's going on, that's the point of that movement in the form. It's why we're going across the body and not down the middle. We've already trained down the middle. That was Sinantao. Now we're looking at moving objects. So we've got to allow in our mind, and without moving all around the room, find an acceptable way of training that. That's what that movement gives you. The action that we're using at the end, of course, is Jing Jiao. It's the same vertical palm that we did in the first form. So we're using familiar weapons, but we're just using a different pathway. We're all right with that? Okay? It's sometimes these things seem a bit weird when you're first confronted with them, but after a while it starts to make a lot of sense. You can see how someone managed to come up with the idea. Just a very simple thing. But the best way I've found to always remember is just to do that little test. Turn your stance one way or the other, stick your hand in what you reckon is the middle, and come back and you'll find it's not. There's the middle. I've missed it by a fist and a half. So if I turn here and put that hand in front of the opposite shoulder and come back, bingo, it's back in the middle. So it's reminding me that the moment my centre changes, the distance between my partner and myself changes, and the angle changes. Now, having done that action, we then go all the way around to the opposite side. We collapse this elbow into another interpretation of Lan Sao. So collectively, this is Jun Ma, turning the stance, Lan Sao, and putting up a barrier. But this is a very special barrier compared to the typical one that we've seen. Up till now, it's just been this really simple, basic structure of arms across chest level, hands nice and loose. Now we've actually changed it and made it a little bit more refined. Now the hand is taking on a proper shape of sorts. It's no longer just hanging there. And no longer is the arm completely flat. I've deliberately made a slight angle. Right, the reason being that, again, when you start doing Chi Sao, you're practicing combat training where there's clashes of limbs, you won't always get an ideal point of contact. An ideal point of contact, if Enzo maybe, would be, in terms of safety, technically for me, if I've collided on the outside of Enzo's left hand with my left hand, with my elbow down, anything he tries to get through there, I know I can control it by just keeping the elbow down. So I can Wu Sao, or I can Jat Sao, or I might even be able to Han Sao if I shift the stance. Because as long as the elbow is down, I can guide him away. But I don't always have the perfect position where I've got my elbow down. I might have ended up like this somehow. Not necessarily that I wanted to do a bomb, but I end up getting caught with my elbow up. When my elbow's up and he tries to get through there, if I go back to dropping the elbow, I let him in. So I can't afford to drop the elbow when it's elevated. I can drop it down here anytime. If I'm there and he pushes in, I can lower the elbow and it won't affect me. But if I drop the elbow up here, I get hit. So the answer is, because I've started with the elbow in a bad position, I've got to keep it in a not such a perfect position and manipulate the stance. So what I do is I draw it off to the side, which takes Enzo with it and leaves my hand now facing back towards him. Now it could happen on the outside. This would be the case of like wrong bong, incorrect bong style. So he tries to force his way through there. This one gets rid of him, leaves him exposed. It might be that it ends up on here. This is a place where you always end up. This is a typical good, correct bong style. And he starts forcing in. Now if I drop my elbow, he's through. But if I keep the elbow out here and just turn a little bit, now I can get through. He can't. So if we swing around this way so you can see it from the other side. So I've started with the elbow up. Enzo's pushing through, he's too strong. So I just let it drop a little bit. I've gone from elbow higher than the wrist to wrist higher than the elbow. And I've kept it all very, very square to my body. This is, again, Chi Sao specific in that sense, that if we put it into this context, we're rolling, I've got my bong here, and he tries to push in. So I just let it stay there. Because now, the situation is now exposed for me to hit. My hand is already facing the right position. You'll see some people will come around and they'll let the hand go forward. Or, in the form, they'll let the hand come back. If I do either of those, you'll see the advantage it gives Enzo. If I push out, he'll let it go. He'll just come through. And if I let it collapse back towards me, he doesn't have to worry too much. It's easy to get through. Can't help it. But if I keep the distance as it is, he's obligated to stick to that. He can't sneak away, because if he takes his hand off, it's already loaded. This is, in other words, a futsal. It's just in the wrong position. That's where I'd like it to be, but because of the nature of how I started, the futsal is now being loaded from the side. But it's still essentially futsal. So we're looking at one idea and bending it, if you like, to suit other situations. This is where Wing Chun is trying again to teach you to expand your thinking and not to think about one shape, one application. One shape, many applications, and it adapts all the time. Now, I like to compare this. This is an example that I confess that I borrowed years ago from an article that Leung Ting put in a magazine. Some of you might have it. It goes back a long time, but if you've been following martial arts for a while, you might know it. He did a series of articles in, it was either Secrets of Kung Fu or Real Kung Fu. I've got a feeling it was Real Kung Fu, or if you're Spanish, Real Kung Fu. And he described a plank of wood. If we can imagine Enzo's arm now is disassociated from his body, and this is a plank of wood floating on water. And he said if you push down on this end of a plank of wood, what will normally happen is that end will sink and this end will rise. And if you push down on this end of the plank of wood, that end will sink and this end will rise. The only way that you can successfully sink the plank completely is if the pressure is absolutely equal in the centre. And then you might be able to push it under water. Now, I thought that was a pretty cool idea. I didn't realise at the time what it was relating to exactly until much later on. But I can see the connection now perfectly with this idea. That when I start, the pressure is on this end pushing the plank down. So if it's too strong at that end of the plank, I will let that plank sink at that end and I get bongsal. But if the pressure is more to the outside, I'll let the plank sink at the other end, and that's lansal. So it's teaching me not to meet his force head on, but to give it one end or the other. Now, there's another little detail that can't be overlooked, and that is, you notice I said the hand is taken on a new shape. It's no longer just sitting there. It's got a shape that resembles wursal. It's a mistake to actually do wursal, because you notice as soon as I brought that up vertical, what happened to my elbow? It's gone lower. So if I start doing that, guess what? Enzo can get in. I've opened the door. So I like to call this one my own personal nickname. I won't let anyone else take credit for this one. It's my mistake. I hope you look at it that way. I call this application of lansal a corrupted wursal. In other words, I wanted to start down here. This would be a better place, but I've had to start up here. So I just modify the wursal. By bending the hand slightly, it adds structure and integrity to the structure. If I bend it too far, it weakens the structure. If I do nothing with it at all, it can still be beaten. But if I just put that little bit of an angle on it, you can feel a difference in the strength. It takes him further off the centre, plus it's now priming the hand for the perfect follow-up. So when you're doing it, thanks Linda, you've got to make sure that you have your hand slightly elevated, not vertical. Right? It's a slight angle that flows down towards the elbow. Just enough, and it's also not rigid. It's firm, but it's not tense. There's softness in the technique. Because if I make it rigid, it will collapse. But if it's firm, it's got some resilience. The other thing is, you'll notice it's at 90 degrees to my body. At no time did I let it go out or come back. I kept it within that 90 degree range. So again, it relates directly to not only chi sao, but combat situations where the hands are in a bad place to begin with. Now, we've done that, to go back to where we are in the form, we've done that last palm strike. We've turned the body, collapsed the elbow into the lansal position. Now we do the first of the three bongsal applications. The first one is called yi bong, and it's done by slowly and gently rotating the body around on its central axis and sending that lansal position forwards to become a bongsal position. Completely soft and loose, with the upper arm now being the centre line, the wrist bone, the big lumpy bone at the end of the humerus, directly in front of the other shoulder, the inside part of the shoulder, the hand turned all the way over. There are in fact three lines to consider here that will help you get this right when you're practicing. If I imagine there's a line drawn on the ground between my heels, going from one side of the room to the other, we'll call that the baseline. And if I imagine a line coming straight out from me opposed to that one, that's the 90 degree line. When I do this action, I start facing 45 degrees off that 90 degree line, and I finish facing 45 degrees the other way. So I've now got a line between the two walls and my heels as the base. I've got the 90-degree line represented by the upper part of the arm. This is the bong part of your technique, going back towards my opponent. And halfway between that is where my feet and my hips and my shoulders are facing. Now that's very, very important to get that, because if I don't turn the body enough, there's not going to be sufficient structure to hold the strength of the opponent's position and push through me. And if I turn too far, that will also weaken it. If I get the right angle, which is that 45-degree angle, the integrity of the whole shape becomes much, much better. And then if the opponent is still too strong, it will collapse in a way that I can control and not fall back on me. So I'm going from facing 45 degrees off centre to facing 45 degrees back towards the centre, if that makes sense to you. Now, this yi bong, the translation of yi means to shift or to move. In modern Chinese, there's an expression yi min, means migration, moving a population. In this case, what it means is what it implies: I've already got contact and I'm using my opponent's energy to shift his attack off my centre or to shift me off his attack line. It works both ways. So I don't do this section with power. If I do this part of the form vigorously, I'm trying to use my strength against something that's already too strong. All that will do is help the other person. What I've got to do is do it softly. Whether I'm doing the lanso action or the bongso action, I'm teaching myself to borrow his energy. The harder he pushes, the easier I move. The harder he drags, the easier I move. This one is being done very exaggerated, because normally you wouldn't go from facing over here to facing there. It's more likely you already have contact here and there's pressure, so you just turn enough, whichever way your footwork happens to be, just enough to change the line. Remember, bongso is only a very momentary bridge between two lines. It just gets me from one side to the other side so I can cross over and hit. So I won't need to follow someone over such a big journey. But in the form, we're doing it for the sake of exaggeration, to fully appreciate the potential and to work the hips, so that I'm learning to move from the centre of the body and not from the shoulders or the toes. So this part is like the first part of Sinuntal form. We should slow down, do it gently, because we want to steal the other person's power. Now, I've mentioned all the details about this arm. Can't forget this one. This position that I'm making here is crucial to your success. Most people tend to make the mistake of allowing the wusao to follow the bong. So they try to bring it forward, or they'll bring it up. Or even worse, I've seen people take it around here and insist it's still got to be on the centre line. Now, this isn't the centre line. Centre line is still in relationship to your opponent. So that means the centre line is still back here. And although that looks like it's gone across my body, it hasn't. If I take this away and square up my stance, it never left the centre line. It's always been there. It just appears to be moving. It's me that's moving around it. This stays still. My teacher used to argue black and blue with some of his contemporaries back in the earlier days about that actual movement, because he would always play it back here, and they all criticised him. No, it should be here, should be here, should be there, should be here, all over the place, but not back here. And he used to say to them, but it's on the centre line back here. And they would argue the point, so he gave up arguing. He just did it his way. Because by and large, they found out the hard way that if you have your hand coming around here, what it does is it gives your opponent both your hands. Ben has tried to pull me into a punch. We've had contact here, and he's put too much pressure. So I've done this. Now if I put this hand up here, all he's got to do now is punch through the setup. If he drags my arm and pulls me forward, and I put my hand over there, I walk right into this one. But if I leave this hand back on my centre line and he pulls me forward, at least being in the centre, I can still bring it up. If all else fails, this hand still comes forward because it's following my spine. The moment, I'll do it on this side, the moment I put it here, if he suddenly drags that arm down that way, this hand will follow it. If he was to manage to grab that hand and take me in that direction. If my hand is sitting in the middle, or over here with the elbow, as soon as he pulls one hand, he gets both. But if I've got it back here and he pulls the front hand, it doesn't matter. This one can still come out and guard you, not even hit him. So it's better to have two parachutes opening separately than having two parachutes opening together. The most obvious thing is I put my hand here like that, all he's got to do is pull down and whack. There's nothing left. But if it's back here and he pulls that one down, this one can come out. It's got room to come forward. Right, now, like I said before, in the application of the form, I seem to be going from all the way from here to there, which is not very realistic. But it's exaggerated for the point of understanding, because normally I'll probably be here and I need to get to there. Or I'm here and he's pushing too strong, so I take him there. I don't need to do such a complete and large action. In Chisel's a bit different, because when we're rolling, I do need to turn a bit further to get this one on. And I do need to turn a little further to get that one off. But if it's just clashing or throwing a punch and there's too much energy, it'll only move a little bit. But I'm still borrowing his energy, so I don't force back. If Ben's pushing in and I push back, that helps Ben. But if Ben pushes in and I just relax, that helps me. So I borrow from him. Likewise, if he's pushing out that way and I try to wind it up, I'll lose contact and get hit. But if I just relax and let him push, I can hit him. So doing the form softly is very important, so you don't learn to use too much power. You've got to learn to use soft power, not hard power. Thank you. And you notice that every time I do that action, I place this hand and then bring it around. And then I take it away. The reason I'm taking it away is that if I was to leave it there, I can't use it again. So having done bong and taken him away, where I want this hand to be is probably hitting him or controlling in some way. So the form again is just saying a very simple reminder. If you're in bong and you need to shift into lancel, you're going to need this hand somewhere else. So for the time being, just take it out of the way. Because then you can always consider where it needs to go later. And then putting it here reminds me that if the elbow's going forward, this one's got to come forward too. It's no good if I do like this. I'm going against myself. So it's teaching me to always bring the hands up and forward and not in different directions. It's a bit like a helicopter. The blades need to work as a team, otherwise the helicopter spins around. Right, so you don't want to do that to yourself. And my reference to parachute is a very simple one to remember. It's a nice, easy image. If you jump out of a plane, and who knows how high they're doing it these days, and you pull on the main chute and it fails, at least you know there's a little one on your belly that you might survive the fall. But if you jump out the plane and pull them both at once, they get tangled, you hit the ground. So consider this the main chute. You pull that one out first, and consider this hand the reserve chute. It won't come out unless it's needed. It just stays back here waiting for instructions. And then it may well be where you hit from, it may be part of your countermeasure. But initially it doesn't come forward. It's all done with the front hand. Now, as I've already said, it's done 3 times. So it must be an important thing. It wouldn't be happening 3 times if it wasn't important to practice. So you're given a chance to really have a good look at the technique and feel that it's working correctly. We then close off this part of the form, this first section, by a repetition of the earlier idea of hitting across the centre. Only now, we actually use a fist instead of a palm. So we're giving the chance to accept the idea of another weapon. And when you first practice this, when I remember being told this by my teacher a long, long time ago when we first went through the form, he said, always teach it and always practice it at least some of the time by placing the hand, then punching. But he said eventually it can become, as you've done the last one and come back for the last time, right, you can just come straight through because that's more natural. But as this one collapses, you simply hit. But by placing it there, you're reminding yourself, use the elbow to find where your opponent is and not just randomly take a shot. Because when you actually use it, it'll probably be as this one collapses, bang, you're in. You've already started attacking. So as your personal practice, break it down. Place it, bring it forward, take it away, place it, throw your punch. And again, the punch goes across the body to allow for the change of position. Now, having done the punching action, we then finish off the first section by turning the outside foot back in, because ideally, if you've been working your stance properly, the left foot's already in the right place. Doesn't need to change. It's ready, already facing where it needs to be. So all I really have to do is turn this one back in, and I should be back in my original stance. Also, I didn't say it before, I might have mentioned it on the day we did the Sinatol form, ideally, Cham Kill form will start and finish in pretty much the same place. And that's a good indication that your footwork is evenly spaced. If you end up metres away from where you started, then it probably means one side has been done too big or too small, or maybe you're doing more techniques on one side than you are on the other. So in a perfect world, I would start on this position and finish on this position. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm keeping my left foot where it is, turning my right foot back in, and I'm doing an action we've already done before, we're familiar with it. And that's the chopping action from the first form. The difference being, there's some body motion to it. Now it's a little bit more practical because I'm actually imagining I've been caught from behind, so I've got to move my body to get that whipping power. As soon as I've done the chops, no need to talk about that because we've already talked about it, I then bring the elbow back into the centre. I don't even think about the hand, because if I was that far out of the centre line, which is an exaggeration deliberately done that way, ideally I hope I'd never be more off centre than about here. So the form says, okay, let's look at the most extreme situation. You're that far away from the centre, what's going to be faster? Bringing your hand back to the middle or bringing your elbow back to the middle? And the answer, of course, is the elbow, because the distance it travels is much less. My hand has to travel all the way back to here. If you measure that, that's about twice the length, if not more than twice the length, that the elbow travels. So instead of bringing the hand back, which is going to take a very, very long time, it's teaching me to always collapse the elbow. Now you notice there's a similarity between what's happening there and what happens here. I'm just letting the hands hang in the first form when I do that. The shoulder's working and the hands are completely relaxed. Same thing here. Elbow's working and the hand completely relaxes. Then push the right hand on top, so this one's been beside the body at this point in time. Put the right hand on top and we go through the same silk-style action that we did in the first form. But now there's an obvious difference. In the first form we did it at a low line, now we're doing it at a medium line. Roughly the same pathway that we do all our basic techniques on, because it's now a more common and practical way to practice the technique. This was a special example, now we're back to typical things. And all that does is reinforce what we've already done in the first form. If a shape isn't working, changing the shape will make it effective, and if you need to take the hand away, replace the hand. Now, getting back just a step backwards to this one, what we're trying to do there is always instigate every action with our elbows. So if Roger and I are exchanging techniques, and for whatever reason my hand is now off the centre line, and his punch is coming out, if I try to bring the hand back, we start together and I say go, and I bring the hand back, he's already inside it. But if I say go, and I bring my elbow back, he didn't get in. Because the distance the elbow travels is a lot shorter, so therefore I can get in there sooner. And that brings the whole arm into play, which takes care of business. So I'm increasing the odds of stopping that attack and putting myself in a really good position to follow on. So the form exaggerates it from all the way out there. Couldn't get a worse place to be. But in application, maybe I'm only that far off. So I've just missed a little bit. I threw a punch and he moved it a little bit to the side, threw a punch. So I just dropped my elbow, now I've got the centre back again. It's the same jatsal you've done before, but over a very, very big distance to emphasise this idea. Thank you, Roger. That brings us to the end of the first section. Right, now second part of the form is where we introduce chasing, stepping for the purpose of going after the opponent. It also contains, in a hidden way, defensive footwork, because unlike what a lot of people think, the means of escaping from an attack is also there, and particularly it's geared towards how we step with bong style, which is quite unique to normal footwork. So as we go through it, I'll try to point that out very, very clearly so you can see exactly what I'm referring to. It's also the first time that traditionally a Wing Chun student would be introduced to the concept of kicking in the Wing Chun system. So to refresh your memory, it begins with a turn to the side and a basic heel kick. Alright, so the very first, almost the first thing we're doing in this section is throwing a kick. And of course the Wing Chun kick is very, very different to the kicks from other systems. Most styles throw a kick by chambering the knee and then extending. Typical snapping kicks. Same for side kicks, snap out, round kicks, snap around, just to prove that at my grand old age I can still do it. But the Wing Chun kicks are very different, and the reason they're different is that they follow exactly the same structural ideas as we have with our hands. We treat the leg like another arm, and if my arm was beside me and I wish to hit the bag in front of me right here, I'd have three choices, two of which aren't very smart. One of those is to lift it up, chamber it, and then throw the punch, which is obviously two movements and can be seen by the opponent and shut down before it's finished. The other might be to swing, but of course swing means a circle, which is going to take longer, and a lot of the power is actually going to be lost in that blow, because it's going to go back out in the direction it came. The third way, the preferred way, is that as the arm is actually lifting, it's already extending. So the energy is coming up from the floor into the target, whether it's left or right, same basic idea. Now, of course, we don't want to start with the hands down if we've got a choice to have them up. But if you use that as the basic idea of understanding the kick, my arm action and my leg action are going to be the same. My hip takes the role of the shoulder and creates a lift. My knee takes the role of the elbow and does the extension. My heel becomes the knuckles and does the kick. So when we kick in Wing Chun, it comes from the floor up into the target. Now, the best way to demonstrate it is not on a bag, because it moves and gives a false sense of power, but on the wall. Because if you kick with a typical snapping type action, there's a natural weakness in the kick that when you make contact with the target, energy will come away. For every action, there's a more or less equal and opposite reaction, so the harder I kick in with that sort of motion, the more energy comes back through my body. Now, even though I might hit the guy hard, I'm not hitting him as hard as I could because of that recoil. And in fact, it could cause me to get knocked over and even end up with no real power at all. But if the kick comes from the floor, straight up from the floor to the target, you can hear a difference already. Right? The power is either going into the wall or back into the floor through my stance. And therefore, more of the energy of the kick goes into the target, with very little chance of me getting knocked over by it. The worst that can happen is if my opponent walks in as that happens to me, what will happen is the body will come back in a way that I can control it, because the hip is aligned in such a way I can set the stance straight away. I won't get pushed backwards by the kick. Now in the form, you're not hitting anything, but we still want to practice the perfect motion. So ignoring this part for a moment, I'll come back to it. What the kick will actually do is it will kind of spiral. It'll start with the knee coming in, but it will finish with the knee turning out. So it's not an up-down action, it's not up and down, but it's more like a spiral or a curve. Now what that does is two things. It guarantees a much more penetrating kind of power, but more importantly, it enables you to step as soon as you kick. And this is an important feature that makes Wing Chun kicking different to other kicking. With snapping kicks, I've basically got to put the foot back to the floor, then I can move. With a kick that is one continuous motion, I can already be in there throwing punches split seconds after the kick has done its work. And in the form, the moment we do the kick, we immediately step. To teach the other idea that's connected with it is that every time you throw your legs out to an attack, you should always follow. Whether you hit the guy or you don't hit the guy, keep the pressure on. Make sure that he's in a position where he must defend himself and not give him a second chance. Because if you kick and withdraw, he gets to reset. But if I'm kicking and not already chasing forwards, if I hit you, the bonus is that you're already suffering the impact of the kick and I finish you off with the hands. If I don't hit you with a kick, you've still got to deal with my next attack. So that's keeping you occupied, it's keeping you defensive. So the form is getting that message to you loud and clear by making you do kick and step. One continuous action. Now before we even get to the kick, there's another interpretation of Lancer. We've seen it this way, we've seen it this way, as the reverse to the Bongso in the first section. Now we're seeing a different interpretation of Lancer. This is where Lancer is used when your hands are down to begin with, and not when your hands are already up. And its main purpose is to make space. Now, I might be up against someone who's got me really, really jammed up, and I cannot get my hands out because there's not enough space. So I've got two choices. I can make him move away from me. I can use Lancer for that. But if he's too strong, if he's too powerful, then I can make me move away from him. By putting this forward, it presents me with a lever that I can use to push off with. Now in the form, when we do it in the form, we're actually pushing off as if I'm moving him. But it would work just as well if I move myself. Now to demonstrate what I mean, Roger's got me all bottled up. My hands are down low, he's got me all caught. I can't get my punches out, he's got that controlled. I can't get this hand up, but I can do that. Because the leverage factor through this one bone is far better than the leverage through the whole arm with a bend in it and the shoulder. If we're caught in a similar position like this, and I try to lift up, it's next to impossible. It's very, very hard. But he's putting the same pressure on me, just using that, no stress whatsoever, and you saw what it did. It made Roger kind of lift up. Now, if he's too strong and I can't move him, like I said, if I can't move him away, move me away. Same deal, because all I wanted was some room. I wanted some space. That's how I can get some space. Now, how you're doing it with your hand is really important. If you notice, when I bring this out, I'm pushing the elbow forwards and downwards, and I'm pulling the wrist back. This is really important because what it's doing is it's telling me not to use my arm, but to use my upper arm and elbow. Not to use this part here, but this part. If I didn't do that, if I just pushed out square, it would have a tendency of making me or encouraging me to push with my forearm. And pushing the forearm doesn't work so well. But if I pull the wrist back and think about my elbow, all of a sudden it's easy to do again. So this is a way of reminding myself, switch this part off, use this one. Any jointed set of bones doesn't have the same leverage in some respects as any single bone. That's why Bongso works well when you've got that upper arm pointing straight at the guy. It doesn't work so well when it's pointing away because this collapses. But put that in the right line and the whole thing is supported. Lancer is exactly the same. I'm pushing off my body, not as you see other people do it, they tend to bring it up or they'll bring it around. Or they'll even go out here and then try to go back. It's straight off the body and the hip adds to it. So if you look at it, if I face the camera so the camera can pick it up first, then I'll swing it around so the rest of you can see it too. I'm actually going straight off my body and turning the hip at the same time so that this line of energy is supported by the rotation. Now, if I do it this way so you guys can see it, so it's coming straight off the body and I'm actually pushing that way, down towards my opponent's centre of balance, because that's where his weakness is. If I can push into his stance strength, I can disrupt his stance. If I push into his upper body, he's got all his upper body strength to fight me. So that's why if Roger and I do that again, if he's got my hands all down, trapped here, and I try to lift upwards, it doesn't work, because he's too strong from that angle. But by going down into his hips, see how he starts to move? It's actually quite easy when you switch the muscles off. As soon as you start using muscles, it becomes hard again. It doesn't work. It's actually making me fall over. But if I relax and just use bones, you can't stop me. And then bang, you've got your room. That's all you want. Now that's, if you like, the most modern idea behind the technique. But it derives from older times where martial arts people did predictable things. There's a classical action in a lot of martial arts where they will do, in a lot of southern Chinese systems especially, they will control a limb and pull you into a punch. They catch you in some way here and they'll do their version of a lapso and hit into the body. They might hit this way, they might hit this way, whatever it might be. Now the problem is, if someone's doing that to you and you try to swing back from the shoulder, you won't have the strength to stop it. So it doesn't matter how much Roger wants that hand to come down there, I can hold it out there very, very easily. But if he switches all that off and uses the elbow, he can actually drive it forwards. So put that together into one forward motion, someone grabs you and pulls you into punch. By just letting that elbow come forward, he shuts down the danger of the punch. A lot of the power of the punch is gone
plus he's now at a distance where it suits him. So that's a more classic interpretation of the action. As you can see, even against someone just trying to grab you, if Roger resists, most people will naturally pull away. When someone grabs, they pull away, or if he does that, that just helps me hit him. But of course, if he just says, fine, you want my arm? Have it. Now I've got no balance. I'm flying. Right? Like Gary says in Los Angeles, you make me fly away. Right? So I become airborne because he doesn't offer resistance. Right? The natural thing is to resist, and what we're trying to learn to do is not resist, relax, and use the bones. Now, another interpretation of this action, another way to use it, some of you have probably found sometimes you're doing Chiso and your opponent gets his hand in behind your head and he starts to pull you down this way. And try as you may, you can't get his arm off because you're pushing across the arm. You better use the good one, not the bad ones, but switch sides. So I'm in here, I've got this on, and Roger's pushing across there with all his might, can't get off, go for it as hard as you can. Right, this is basically Tanso. He's not going to beat that by pushing across it. He can push there for an afternoon, and I'll just casually stand here and enjoy it. But if he uses that same structure and pushes down in towards my hip, now he can break it out. It's possible to destroy that grab. So here he is, he's got that on. This won't get him off, but that moves him and puts me in a better position. Now he can't strike back before I can. But of course, like everything, you don't wait till it's on and it's, oh, okay, well, let's get out of it. It should be happening instantaneously. But as soon as his hand slips in, what I should be doing is immediately using the upper arm. Not my forearm, because if I push down with the forearm, it doesn't stop it. It lifts me up. If I relax this part and use the elbow, he has to let go, because what are you feeling here? Yeah. It's nasty, isn't it? Because what happens is if he leaves his hand in contact, it pulls right across these muscles. And it's a very, very nasty feeling, which I'm sure will lead to a damage if you don't release. So most people will let go. And then you got back in control. So again, here's a case of one action. There's already 3 potential applications. And it goes on and on and on. You can be in here in combat, and he wants to try and get through there. Just by using that elbow, you can keep him down. We basically were using the same idea early on in the first section. When I did this, if he tries to push now, I do the same thing. I'm using that lancer with the elbow to push down into a centre of mass. So it's difficult for Roger to get his hands up. So one idea, one concept becomes able to be applied in lots and lots of different ways. Anytime he's got my arms up, one of the things I can do to get out of it is use this same shape. In a way, you're practicing that in the first section too, because this action here, one of the means that we can use that for is if someone tries to lift your elbow, you don't compete, you just drop your elbow. So this is just another way of interpreting that. So all you got to do is use your imagination. You can start to see lots of ways of using the tools. That's what this is all about. We have a very, very clever toolbox, and if you apply lateral thinking, suddenly all those tools become really, really useful for lots and lots of things. So you don't need to go out and learn another 20 or 30 or 100 new techniques. You've got a handful of techniques that work universally across a huge range of possibilities. Now, when it all comes together, it's the lancer with a turn of the stance. Dankyo. Dang means to scale upwards, or to simple word in English would be ascend or ascending. So dankyo is literally ascending kick. Helps describe the action. It goes up on a slope. It doesn't go 1, 2. It's a continuous ascent up the slope, with the height usually being around about waist or upper thigh. We don't want to be kicking much above that because it's not very practical. And then this is where the trick comes. While I'm going forward with the step, I now introduce the second type of bongsa. This one is called power bong. If you were to spell it in an English way, you might spell it P-A-A-U. And that means to hurl or to throw. As in, you've got something in your hand and you're trying to take it as far as you possibly can. So you put your whole body behind it. Now what we're throwing when we do the power bong is we're throwing our elbow. You remember I said the first bong, so yi bong, was when contact already existed. And I'm shifting one way or the other around that point of contact. Power bong is when contact doesn't exist and we need to make it in a hurry. We're hands down or facing not completely towards the attack without very much contact. And suddenly we've got to put something between us and the attack. Now if we try to get our hands up, particularly if the hands are right down beside us, getting the hands up to do anything like a puck or a jut or even a punch or any of the other handful of techniques that we have will probably not get there in time, because the hand has to travel too far. It needs to get not only up to a certain level but over the other technique to cut it off. You don't have time to get over it before it's there. What we do in powerbomb is we use the elbow to move because it's shorter distance, just like we used it here. And because the elbow is already underneath the technique, it can still get underneath the attack and therefore, hopefully, catch it and knock it away. Now, it's not a guaranteed answer. It's a potential application which will probably have reasonable success if you apply it the right way, which is directly back at the attack. It's wrong if you see people doing this. They're assuming they've got time to go backwards before they go forwards. And you don't. If your hands are down here and something is suddenly coming at you, you don't have time to go backwards. It must be from the elbow, throw it forwards. Literally using the forearm as a shield and using the elbow to throw that shield forwards. So it comes up as it goes forwards. Because I cannot guarantee, if Ben is the bad guy, I cannot guarantee where this punch is going. He may be going for the top of my head, might be my nose, my chin, my throat, my chest, might even be my gut. That's a big range. No point trying to guess because I don't know, I'm not inside his head. He might not even know where it's going, let alone me figuring it out. But the one thing I'm sure of is it's originating from the shoulder and it's coming in my direction. So that being the case, because it's coming in my direction from the shoulder, if the punch comes and I move something in that general direction, there's likely to be a point of contact. And therefore I can save myself from the first onslaught. But the difference between application and the form is in the form I'm going forwards. Now surely if Ben's throwing a punch, I don't want to do this. I'm walking into trouble. But again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that if the punch is coming and I move this way, in other words, reverse the footwork, now I've got a way of using it. So that begs the question, why in the form am I going forwards? Right? What's the primary way that Wing Chun wins a fight? By attacking and going forwards. So the form is teaching you and encouraging you to be moving after the target as much as possible. But it's assuming that hopefully you've got a brain and you can see the reverse. Just like we've been shown this can work this way and this way. Well, now without showing you that there's an actual reverse application, surely you're starting to think that way, you can see that. So regardless of where that's going, if I lift and bring it forward, there's a reasonable chance we'll collide. Whereas if you see in other Wing Chun systems or methods, you'll often see them bring the hand up and bring it down, or bring the hand in and bring it over. Both of those could fail, because if I bring it up first, what if he's punching low? Punches hasn't started yet, I do this. Oh, bad luck, he was hitting a body punch. Or I bring it upwards and he's hitting to the head, too late. But if it goes forwards and upwards, I don't know where that's going. Ben can try to surprise me. There's always got to be a point of contact. In other words, it's an extension of this idea. That if I'm there and anything's coming in this direction, somewhere between that line and this line, there has to be a meeting place. And the same if I'm high and he's shooting low. Somewhere between that line and this one, there has to be a meeting place. Powerbomb is just a more sophisticated application of that theory. Right? So you don't want to use powerbomb, and if your hands are up, you shouldn't be doing bong style anyway. Right? Like I said when we talked about Sinnental form, if your hands are up ready for the fight, why are you doing a defensive action? If I'm here like this and Ben does anything, I should be trying to hit him straight away. But it's when I don't have my hands up, when it's a bit of a surprise, then bong style might be the only way that I can avoid that first one. Might not want to follow up, I might want to run away, but at least I've survived the first attack. That's the purpose of the exercise. Thanks, Ben. So remember, it's a throw initiated in your elbow. You literally throw your arm. And where you're throwing it is straight back at your opponent's position. So if where Brett is with the camera represents the punching line, I'm throwing at him. When I move, I'm throwing towards him, not over there somewhere. You will see most people in Wing Chun tend to do it like this. They end up doing the bong in the direction they're moving. That's incorrect. It needs to be at 90 degrees to where I'm moving. So while I'm going that way, my bong style is going this way. Why? Because when I do the reverse, you'll find, if Roger comes back up again, here's the punch, here's my defense. I've actually gone to an angle where it suits me. I've now got this punch offline and I've given myself a line for my punch. If I face the bong, the bong faces the punch, I'm now giving Roger a second chance. So the last thing I want to do when that punch comes out is do that, because now he gets to hit again. So what I need to do when the punch comes out is go towards him, so that this one can be intercepted by mine. So again, we're almost in a case of almost like Chi-Sal specific. Now, you're probably thinking, hang on, that's not Chi-Sal. I'll give you the specific incidents. We're rolling, and he tries to drag my hand down to trap me. Do the lato attack. Right? Which bong have I just done? Isn't this power bong? Because for a moment, if we go in super slow motion, when he traps that hand, I'm disengaged. I don't have contact. What do I need to make straight away? Contact. Here it comes. Power bomb. Look at the angle. Roger steps away. Isn't that the same as the form? Same thing. Just not as obvious when you see it by itself done in a line. But there it is. If we do it reverse, I'll do it to Roger. Alright, we're rolling. I trap his arm. There it is. He's just done power bomb. Once he's now made contact, it literally becomes the E-bong, because now if I push on it, he's going to let it go, or he's going to move it away. And if I start pushing that way, he's going to move it away. So it's two ideas within one idea. The POW and the E are interconnected. It just depends what pressure you're getting and how the situation evolves as to which one will do which job. And the hidden thing that's not easy to see, but Roger can feel it, and I felt it when he did it to me, is when that bomb comes forward, while the elbow is going forwards, there is a slight shift to the side, because you don't want to just go crunch and meet the force head on. So as you make contact, you're diverting it. So again, it's a case of E-bong, shifting bong style, hidden inside power bong. So it's not a hard clash. I'm not going crunch straight in there like that, which is going to hurt me. But as that contact is made, you can just feel it. Can everyone see what's happening to his arm? I met it here, but it finishes up here, because I've driven forward with the elbow and let the bomb cell shift across. And that is exactly, again, if he steps out of the line, it's exactly the same as the form. Exactly the same technique. Now you notice when I'm doing the form, I let this hand hang right down. In a lot of other Wing Chun systems, you'll see them have the hand up. They'll actually start there, and then they'll end up going over. It's a bit like swimming stroke. That's setting you up for getting hit, because you're going over the top of the technique. We put it right down here to represent if I'm standing with my hands down. I'm trying to symbolically represent a situation. Same as in Sidental, when I do the Tanso, I drop it before I bring it out. Why? Because my hands might be down when I start. So I need to set up the whole idea of getting on top of the technique. Here's the same. My hands are down, they're even crossed over. I put that one there for the same reason I put it here before. Hey silly, don't forget, you're going to need that hand. Don't just do that and think you're going to survive. Because remember, if he's punching seriously, it won't be one punch. It'll be a couple. So I can't afford to be going, yeah, that's got you. Next thing I know, I get hit by the second technique. This one's got to be here so that I've got something to put in the way of what is potentially the next attack. So by putting my hands across each other, with this one lower, it's saying to me, all right, your hand's too far away, use your elbow. Don't try to use your hand. Don't lift, throw with the elbow. And secondly, don't forget, bring the rear hand up, because you need that rear hand there. If this fails for any reason, that's all you got left, until you can get it out and start doing other things. So in what appears to be a relatively straightforward combination, you now realise there's a lot of things to consider. And then every time we drop it away, we're rehearsing it again. And then we drop it away, and we rehearse it again. Now before I go to the next technique, there's also another little side step we can take in the discussion. This also relates to your single hand Chi-Sao. Right? This also relates to single hand Chi-Sao when you're moving. Most of you have already done that. I'm sure NJ, you do this the same drill, right? Which, if Roger and I do it, I'll put him around this way again because I can work the healthy arm. Single hand Chi-Sao, normally we stand still, and I give him some energy, he gives me some energy. Right? As everyone in the room has done at least a lot of times, I would think. And most of us would have practiced with footwork. It's a way of introducing you to the concept of extra pressure and movement. I step in, and then Roger steps in. And then we come back again. I try to get in, he tries to get in. Now again, if I ask him to step away, what have I just done? Exactly the same as this. So it's showing me in the form the best angle for bong sal. Bong Sao is very unique. I had this discussion when we talked about Sinutai, but it's worth bringing up again. Bong Sao is the only technique in the system that is done with the elbow out. Everything else is done with the elbow pointing downwards. Pak, Jat, Cham, Tan, So Sao. All those techniques, the elbow is basically pointing down. But Bong Sao, the elbow points up. So with Bong Sao, I can't afford to step back in the normal way. Roger's ready to punch that straight line. I go back with Pak Sao, this side step's fine. If I go back with Tan Sao, this side step's fine. If I go back with Jat Sao, this side step suits it to a T. Not a problem. But if I go backwards in that line with Bong, he can get through there. Because unlike the other techniques, which all have the potential to attack, Bong Sao has no potential to attack straight away. Therefore, it requires a special kind of footwork. And that footwork is when I bong, I must shift to the side, or alternately, pivot. If I have contact, I'll pivot. End result's the same, but I need to be shifting my body that way. Otherwise, it will collapse. So the form is reminding us, by doing this action, it's just saying all you got to do is back that up, and there you have the right shape when you play Bong Sao. So think about it when next time you're doing the single hand Chi Sao. If it wasn't working up until now you've probably figured out how to fix it. When you get in here, make him move you. Don't step away. A lot of people get it wrong because they do this. I step back for Roger, but all that does is say, come and hit me. What I've got to do is leave my hand there and make him move me. This doesn't collapse, I collapse. I step around his position. And now I've got the open door. It also means I'm nice and close. I don't have to waste my time doing dangerous things like lap sao. When I'm this close, I can already hit him. The only reason I'll ever do lap sao is if I get the wrong distance. If I mucked it up somehow, I can't reach with this hand. That's what I use lap sao for, just enter. Otherwise, Bong Sao should always be done so that I stay close. I want to do it again. I want to stay as close as possible. I want to soak him into a position where I can hit him straight away. Now, at the end of this particular sequence, we've done our 3 hao bong. At the moment, of course, I'm not facing directly to my direction of travel. I'm facing my eye contact, and my arm technique is going straight back towards where the cameraman is. Right, so as if I'm imagining I'm fighting with Brett. But my body is actually out in this direction. I'm more facing Enzo and you fellas over there. Yet my direction of motion is the bag. So I've got 3 lines happening at the same time. Having such a bad position in terms of my direction of motion, what the form then does is say, okay, if you're off centre, you must get back to the centre by the safest means possible. So to do so, I'm training myself to use the elbow and the hips and get back to the centre. Not to go around in this way, but literally to pull this elbow straight in and turn the hips, so that now the whole body is going in the same direction. So before we even think about this as a punch, more important is the fact that it is now covering the centre. I left a gap and I've just closed the gap. I've thought about bringing my elbow back to the centre. I could do it with an open hand and be just as effective, but the form is clever. It takes opportunities to teach new ideas wherever there's an opportunity. So here's an opportunity to introduce a really important idea. This is a different kind of punch. We call this one Tao Kun. Tao means whip. So this is literally a whipping punch. And what that means is that I'm using the elbow and the hip to drag and whip the elbow to the centre, and at that moment I get a chance to try a different idea. As we discussed in the previous discussion on the Sinutai form, this punch is the perfect weapon within a range of approximately eyebrow to about mid-chest. Because in those 3 or 4 levels of range, I'm able to use both the wrist and the elbow and the stance to great effect. So the energy of the punch is in fact driving upwards. But the moment I get lower than the midsection, I can't use the wrist, and the line is now going the wrong way to use the ground. So if I put my fist on Enzo's chest and say, move forward, it's not easy for him to move. He's trying, but he can't beat the ground. Again, if I can be a show-off, right? Let's do a side step. But it's the ground that's holding him up, not my arms, because my arms aren't strong enough to do that by themselves. If I use my arm strength, he'll push it over. It's this goes. But if I relax and use the stance, he can't move that back, because he's fighting the building. But down here, that doesn't work. If I put it there and he moves forward, it collapses straight away. It's gone. There's no energy. Because no longer if you could see what was happening microscopically, when you hit this way, the wrist and the angle of the lower metacarpal bones, the finger bones, or phalanges, I think they are in the hand, aren't they? Who's the doctor? Yeah. Right. Those bones are actually running on that angle. They're reflecting energy back through my lower leg. But the moment I get down here, it doesn't bend like that, so the energy is going this way. So the elbow, of course, is the first weak point, and it collapses. The shoulder will then collapse with it. So if I'm going to hit someone to the body, how do I get the most out of my punch? Because that might hurt, but it's not going to hurt as much as if there's a better way. The better way is turn it over. Because now if I put it like that and he moves towards it, now it's strong again. Because instead of the wrist and these lower finger bones acting as the dispersal of the energy, the whole forearm, if you look at it, now that angle there is reflected here. So if you're fighting, it wouldn't be necessarily one that I use much on Enzo, but say for someone like Ben or a tall person, if I come inside, drive up this way will be far more damaging than if I come in that way. That will hurt. This will potentially break bones because the ground is behind this strike. Right, thanks, Enzo. So it's giving you the opportunity to consider the most important thing, which is your safety, cover the centre line, but taking advantage of the fact that, hey, here's a chance to look at a different kind of science. How can I hit hard when the angle's wrong? You can feel it on the back. You hit the back down here, and it's got a certain amount of power, and then twist it, and suddenly a whole different kind of power. Right, so that's what I can do with a vertical fist, but that's what I can do when I twist it up, because there's more body behind it, more of the ground, more of the legs, so it's a heavier hit. Same as before, the last two or threes, but in the long run, you hit with whatever you can hit with. But ideally, we're still trying to get those lower knuckles in there if we can. But really, in that situation, whatever you can hit with is good enough. Now, once I've done the Tao-kun, which incidentally shouldn't end up much higher than your own chin or at least mouth height, because if it's going past that, you've now punched up. A lot of people call this Wing Chun's uppercut, but that's probably a dangerous thing to call it because it's not going up. It's going forward. It's the same as always. It's the shortest distance between where my hand is and where I want it to go. Right? So if my hand was there, that would be the shortest distance. If my hand was there, that's the shortest distance. My hand's over there, I'm still looking for the shortest distance every single time. So it's dropping and driving forward. So it's going there, not going up. So if you see people doing this, warn them against it because they're misusing the technique. So that's why Sifu would always say, easy way to test this is put your other hand out in front of you and aim to hit it. Right, in front of your mouth or your chin. So that's as high as it needs to go. Now, having done that action, we now do an introduction into Bilji concepts, but it's also based on things we've already done in the first form. If I need to make a blind turn, I don't exactly know what's going on here because I'm not looking there. I don't want to just turn around because my face will be the first thing that gets hit, or at least my head anyway. Whether it's my face or not, it's irrelevant. I'm going to get hit in the upper body. So what we're doing now is a technique called Ying Sao, and Ying Sao is teaching me to move my hand before I move the rest of me. So it goes up, around, and then the body comes around with it. And then I drop down to mid-level, as in the first form. Now, first of all, what's important is to remember how to get the right height. We don't just turn around from where it is, because that would be too low. So it comes up first, till the crease in your wrist there, where it joins your hand, is approximately level with your eyebrows. This is quite a precise thing that I'm telling you, so consider it. And then it's rotating as the body comes around after it. So it starts facing me, but it ends facing away from me. Now, why eyebrow level? Simple human biology. The human face, from the eyebrows down, if you disregard the nose for a moment, some of you might need to disregard it even more than others if you're very European. Disregarding the nose, the face is basically flat. Whereas from the eyebrows upwards, the skull starts to round off. Now, every boxer worth his salt knows that if things are getting tough, put your head down, put your gloves up, because the blows will bounce off his skull and not do so much damage as getting hit in the face. So that being the case, if I'm turning around into an area where I might have a chance of getting hit, I don't want to sacrifice my face. So what I'm doing is, by coming up to the height of my eyebrows, I'm making sure that if anything gets through, at worst, it may hit me on the rounded part of my skull, which will be less damaging and initially less painful than getting hit flush in the face. Because if I get hit in the face, it's going to bring on a natural reaction of the tears and the blood and all the rest of it, and disorientation will follow. But getting hit on the top of the head, I might get a bit dizzy, but I'll still at least be able to see and hopefully still be able to think. So we're thinking about that right from this moment. As I make that first action, I raise my arm so that my wrist is level with my eyebrows. And then the arm moves first. And then the hips and the left foot. The right foot is already in the right place. The left foot comes around to meet it until I'm facing forwards. And then I bring it down. Right? Bringing it down is just as important as all the rest, because if I don't bring it down, I've gained nothing. I'll use Ben on purpose because it's a taller person, so it'll make it really obvious. Ben is behind me. He might already be pushing me, trying to shove me into a wall or something. If I just do this, anything he wants to do, he can do. If I try to just step away and turn around, I'm still going to get hit. So what is more practical, and certainly he's not going to do what he expects me to do, is when he's pushing and he's got control, I actually go towards him. I move my hand first, then bring the body around, but up there, Ben still has an advantage. He can push back on that because with his reach, he can still destabilise me. So at that point, I do this. I bring it down, because now Ben's my height, and I can hit him. So put it all together, he's trying to shove me across the wall, Ben gets hit. I don't get hit. He falls into it because I've brought the hand around first. It's not a circle, I'm not doing this. That lets him in. It's most definitely up, around, down. Right? The down part will vary as to where his hand is. Sometimes you won't even have to worry about it. His head will be there already. But we put it in there in case we do collide. If I end up like that, that's no good. That's where I want to be. Right here, I'm going to get hit, but here, hard. If Ben wants to hit me now, I've already predicted where the hand will be, and I'll get there first. Remember, if I get him down, I've got more control. He's a tall man. I fight him up there, tall man wins. So what have I got to do? Bring the tall man down. Now it's harder for him. As a tall man, he wants to lift me up. So if he can get underneath my hands and drive me up, that suits him. And that's always the strategy. That strategy is reflected every time you do Chi-Sao. Even single-hand Chi-Sao is teaching you that. I'm inside, I'm underneath, so my attack should go up to try to lift him out of the centre. If I go down, no threat, he'll hit me. Ben's on top. If his attack goes up, no threat, I'll get in. So his attack should go down, and then I have to defend. That's the most basic fighting strategy that you ever should consider. Inside, lift, outside, bring him down. That evens up the playing field, makes the small person have the advantage over the big guy, and if you're a big guy fighting a really tough little guy, that gives you a chance. Right? You're trying to destabilise your opponent in the best way possible. So here we are in here. Once I get your hands around, once I've covered that hand, get him down. Because now he's got to go where his hands are going. No matter what he wants to do, if I do that, even if I don't want to fight, I've already made a way out. Now, it might not be that I have contact. This is a luxury. If he's pushing me, I can feel him. It might just be that I've been busy over here fighting one guy, and I realise, oh shit, somebody else is there. Well, I'll bring my hand around, if I was lucky. I'll bring the hand around just in case, because it's better he hits my arm than he hits me. I should never have done it on that arm. That's my problem, not yours. So we never make a blind turn. If you have to turn, lead with your hands. If you're walking down the street and you hear footsteps behind you, you don't just go, who's that? And walk right into trouble. It could be a friend, but it might also not be. So without looking too dramatic, take a couple steps forward and bring your hands around first. Right? As just a safety precaution. Just remember, up first to cover your face, hand comes around first, your body follows, bring it down. Once we get to here, back to basics. Change the hands and close the fall. And that's the second section taken care of. Third section is the simplest one. It has the minimal number of techniques and also has the minimal number of new ideas. It's basically reinforcing other ideas that we've already seen. The first and most important difference is we have no hand action when we make our first turn. The hands remain beside the body and we do the kicking action as before. But instead of kicking and stepping and throwing our bong so over this way, now our bong goes in the same direction as our motion. We call this one dai bong. Dai means low, so this is literally a lower or low bong so. Now, if it's done properly, again, it emphasises the elbow. A lot of people will do like a thrusting action, or they'll do a lifting action. I've even seen all these big actions. Again, we've got to remember, the reason I'm doing this technique is because my hands have been down low and I have to move my elbow because I don't have time to move the rest of my arm. So when I do the very first one, I just drop the hands slightly and snap the elbows around. I then let the hands fall down and I do it again. And I let the hands fall down and I do it again. 3 times. Which also reminds me that I didn't mention before, but it's relevant in both second and third sections. You try to time the elbow action to match when the heel reaches its destination. I don't want separate movements. What I want is one action. So when you see when my hip arrives, my elbows arrive. When I'm playing the pole bomb, when my hip arrives, my elbow arrives. I'm learning to develop body unity and not step, bomb, drag, or step, drag, bomb. Together. And then together. And then together again.
But it's unloaded before you move.
It's not loading up, it's just from where it is,
Relax down.
totally relaxed, just hanging there. And the same.
Before you make the first movement, stepping.
Yeah.
So then step.
So you step, boom. The front leg's got to go first, obviously.
Yeah, you're already down here.
But the hand's already down. I'm assuming my hands are in the wrong place, and I'm bringing them up. And the same in this last section, my hands are down, and I'm snapping them forwards. Now, remember that because I'm doing 2 at once, I can't pass the centre. Because to do that would mean I'd end up with one hand in and one hand out, which wouldn't be a good habit. But if I let them hit each other, that's going to hurt, and that's not very useful either. So what we do is we take into account, I can't bring the hands past the centre, so I make the elbows work extra hard. The elbows come all the way around like a revolving door as far as possible. And when you're looking at it from side-on view, ideally your head and shoulders are back, because a big mistake that's commonly done is people buckle up like this, they lean over, sit back in the stance, and the hands will be sitting almost in the same line as the knee. Can you see where they are? Literally above the knee joint. Not out here, that's too far forward. Not back here, that's too close. But above the knees. And when I drop back, and there they are again, snap the elbows. I drop them back, snap the elbows. So I'm emphasising this part. Now this is another classic example of doing 2 things at once, but applying them separately. What in fact is happening here is 2 completely different bong-so applications. This represents one kind of application, this is a completely different one. If we take the inside one first, so where the hands and the feet are in opposition, that represents a low attack that's come at your body when the hands are down and you're getting off the line and trying to clear a pathway so that you can then counter. Say for example, a low punch or a spearing action, maybe they've got a stick and they're trying to poke you with it, or they've simply come down and lunged in with a long punch. It can also be used against straight kicks as a means of getting rid of those. So it's a simply overall solution that if the hands are down and something challenges my lower half, I shield myself. I move off the line and try to knock the energy away with a soft hand. At the same time, I'm doing same hand and leg side. That represents a situation where I've been dragged. Someone's actually tried to pull me over off balance. So if I get pulled off balance, I need to use the same side to control the stance. If I use the opposite sides, it won't work. So Ben wants to come on. So let's say, for example, we're rolling in Chiso, and he suddenly latches onto that arm and tries to pull me off balance. That arm needs to go forward and match this leg. Because if I let that arm go forward, but I pull this leg forward, I'm off balance. I can't control what's happening. Right? I could be just standing in my own business, he tries to pull me towards him. It needs to be the same side. Because if I try to do it like that, I'll get twisted over. He can pull me in two different directions. But this way, whether he drags me to the left, to the right, or straight in, I can control his balance. So to save time, to be economical, the form is allowing you to practice both at the same time. So we're getting to do two ideas within one idea, so it's economical training. So that's why I said this is an easy one, because there's nothing really flowery or fancy happening. We just got two ideas. Getting away from an attack to the midsection and reacting by going forward if you get dragged, relaxing your arms and going forward. At the end of that sequence of 3 bong, there's a half step movement. I bring my hands up and a double palm strike, keeping my stance in this bent aspect. Now, the ideas behind that are pretty straightforward. As Sifu used to say, in a lot of other Wing Chun systems, what they do, they get to this position and they do all these weird and wonderful arm actions. They might come around and they might drive up. Got all sorts of strange things happening. The most common one is big wrist circles. And he would say very simply, if I've done a low defense against something attacking the midsection, or I've been grabbed, what is it that I'm circling? There's nothing to circle. It's different if I'm up here and there's a hand there, I can circle it. Down there, there's nothing to circle. So there's no point doing a big action. What we really should be doing is reminding ourselves, get the hands up. My hands are down, I've done whatever I have to do down there, get the hands up. The closest you get to any sort of fancy circle is potentially, Roger, can you look, is that if I'm rolling with my partner and I'm finding it difficult to get in through the centre, it's just too strong, I can't break his centre line, what I can do is control here or control here. So if I turn that around so you can see it on the other side. So my bong style hand, which is in bong here and underneath his arm, comes around and catches his elbow. And you see it matches the sort of footwork we just did before. Other than that, my hand's down there, what am I possibly going to circle? And if I take it off too big, I'm going to get hit. So what it's teaching me to do is if he's throwing a punch in my midsection, whoa, get my hands up, put him back in the fight. Don't leave him down here waiting for the photographer to come and take a picture, because you're going to get hit. Alright, so that's why we don't have a big fancy flowery action. It's very simply bring the hands up and forward. They don't come back. Right? They stay out here in front of me and come forward as I come forward. And then palms with the legs bent this way. Now, people university don't seem to know why that's there. You ask people who know the Wing Chun lineages and they're very, very at a loss as to why we have that. It's actually a really, really simple idea. Most times we assume we're going to have our stance to get power. What if we don't have our stance? What if we've run out of room to move and we're pretty much standing straight up and down? Can't afford to then use the upper body to get power, but you don't have to. If you understand your stance, you can still use your stance. And what a lot of people do is if they've got not much room to move, and this is my opponent, I want to move him, they'll tend to try and use their upper body to push. But if you don't have a very stable stance, you're not going to get much help from the ground. And just using your upper body, if you're not a big person, it's going to be difficult to get power. But if you still know how to use your stance by dropping your centre of gravity and tucking your hips in slightly, then you can still get a lot of energy without having to wind it up. I don't need to go by that, which will only move a little bit. I can actually stand virtually straight up and down and still get power. So the form is demonstrating that in the most simple way of bringing the feet together but keeping the weight down. Notice my head didn't height, take two. My head height didn't change. I didn't step up. I stayed down at this level and then I can still get power from the ground. So even if I can't make a stance, doesn't mean I can't get energy. Alright, so it's simply trying to help you to understand how to use your whole body for power instead of relying just on shoulders or arms or some other aspect. So it's a really, really simple idea. It's just so simple, I guess people just don't get it unless someone tells them. So the double palm is just a convenient way. It could be fist, could be anything else. The palms just act as a convenient measure. Then we withdraw the hands and everything's repeated on the other side. Some people ask, why do we step around? We don't kick. Well, the reason being is we've already practiced the kicks. If you count them up, we've done 3 kicks already. There's really no need to do it again straight away. We can kick here after we get around. Some people suggest you should kick to turn. But Sifu always said, you don't need to. What you really learn to do is how to find your stance. By this stage in your training, you should be able to automatically go into your stance from any position. Wherever you happen to be, you know your measurement. You don't have to go, hold on, ready now. It's got to be automatic. So from here, what I'm doing is I'm learning my stance. Throw the kick, same sequence on the other side, and it repeats across until the very last moment. And after the 3rd bong, when I come back, I do the first and only wang gyop or side kick action. So we should translate a horizontal kick because that's what the word wang gyop means. But generally it's called a side kick because it's coming out on a side type angle. But where most people kick out this way, in other words, if I'm using Brett as a reference, most people would kick back towards that corner. The way we were taught to do it is to kick to the reverse side. What I'm using this leg for is to use my lower half the same way that I've already previously practiced using my upper half. I'm making a blind turn and I'm making sure that something can't reach me before I get around. So if I turn around only, I could be overwhelmed. But if I turn with a kick, if someone happened to be rushing in at that moment, at least for a split second they're going to pause because I want to avoid the kick. So we're not doing the kick in order to land it. I'm not imagining a make-believe fight scenario and I'm beating the hell out of this guy here and then I turn around and do the perfect side kick on the road behind me. It's more, he's there somewhere, so I'm just making sure that I can face him and stop him from getting any closer for a minute. Just gives me a bit of distance. This is a very, very versatile kick because it doesn't have to be done to the rear. It can be done from the front, but also it's normally not done head on. In other words, use a live person, might be easier to see. If I'm more or less square to my opponent, the basic heel kick is a good kick to use. Because even if he rushes in on it, the worst that will happen is I'll get pushed back in a useful stance. But if I'm square on, it's not wise to do this sort of kick because if Roger moves into that one, he can take my balance. So we normally use the wang gyop when the angle is different. He's rushed towards me, I've gotten out the way, then I use it to bridge the gap from here. Or I'm already really, really close to the guy and I use it here, or as some of you have done in sticky legs, as he tries to sweep my leg. I take out the back leg. That's the sort of angle we would use this kick, and not as a square-on fight to do that one as a first kick. It's not a very smart move. It's a very good secondary move. If I've thrown a front kick and he tries to block it out of the way, you can still continue and do a side kick because he's actually knocking it down for you. So you just continue, and if you have to, you can run away. So there's actually, in Chiso, you can try that as a separate drill and practice that one. So the main purpose of this one is that if I'm facing the wrong way, I've been caught out of position, this acts as a safety bridge so that he can't get any closer. Somehow Roger's managed to get me off balance and he's coming from there. So that will slow him down. May not do a lot of damage, but either it'll slow him down or he'll see it coming and back off. And now I've got my centre back again. It's all about trying to recover my centre line the best way I can. And it gives you an option then of another way to kick when you can't reach the target with a heel kick. You might have a different line to attack from now. Thanks, Roger. As soon as we've finished the wang gyop, we're now facing the opposite way. So we turn back into the centre and use the same sorsal that we did in the first form. It's exactly the same as this one here, only I've taken one hand away and turned the stance. Or I've taken this one away and turned the stance. So it's not in the middle, it's actually in front of where my centre line is now facing. So it's off centre, if you like. The first one is one-handed, but after the first one, I then alternate the hands. This one comes back into what looks like a half a Tansal position, and then I reverse it again. Same idea. Now this is another case of Chi-Sao specific training. I'm rolling with Ben, and Ben decides, hell, I'm not having any luck with my hands, I'll try and kick him. I've stopped the kick without ever having to touch his leg, simply by controlling his hand and putting pressure on his hand. And you notice where this one's ended up? It's just sitting back slightly so that I can keep contact and monitor the progress of the other hand. If I was to remove it, I'd get hit, And if I was to waste it by doing a tan style, there's no advantage. So I don't do either. I don't take it away and I don't extend it. I literally leave it there. So as he tries it again to kick, it just sits there because now it's right in front of the target. And it doesn't matter if he's kicking with his right leg or he's kicking with his left leg. I'll do exactly the same thing. So if he tries to lift his left leg, same thing works. By pressing on his arm, it stuffs up the hip position, so he can't use his legs before these hands can come in. And now all the doors are open for all the good stuff. So when you're doing the form, although you're by yourself, think about having somebody there and you're pressing on his arm or pressing on his arm. It could be his leg. If the range is wrong and Ben throws a kick, I'm too far away, of course it can be done on his leg. I can hit him anywhere between the knee and the foot, depending on how far away we are. But ideally, we're in here and he tries to kick, I just control his arm. Now he can't finish the kick. You can make someone look really, really stupid. Just put your hand out and say, kick me. You can't do it. Try again, kick. The worst that happens is I'll get a grazing kick somewhere down here, whereas his intention was to hit me much higher and do some serious damage. But just by controlling his arm, go. Can't do it, and he ends up falling into my line. So when Cham is trying to tell you, you can shut down a kicking fighter by controlling his hands. Don't give him kicking range. Get in and shut down his hands, and then he's lost his kicking range. You can't use it so easily. All right, stay there because I'll use you again. Finally, at the very finish, we use the hips and the shoulders to drive back into the centre to recover what is a lost position. I'm facing the wrong way, so I get my centre back. And this is where all these hundreds of hours of wrist circling that you've been doing come into being. If you're watching carefully, I'll do it in slow motion. When I punch that punch, I do not straighten up my hand and hit a regular fist. I actually hook it backwards. So if I hold it up like that so you can see it, it's at an angle. It's not here, it's here. All right, it's bent. The reason being that if I'm in the wrong position out here and Ben's trying to hit me, if I come back with a normal fist, he can resist that because the direction of force is not going at him, it's going over there. But if I turn the wrist, it directs the energy far more strongly and it knocks him out of the way. There's a potential that I might even hit him. And of course, if I do, better to hit him with the knuckles in the back of the hand. This won't hurt me as much as him, that will mostly hurt him. But the only way I'm going to be able to sustain the energy of that blow is to have trained the wrist first. Bilgi does the opposite. You hit the wrist bend this way. Again, if you haven't done the wrist training, you're going to break your own hand. But given the circumstances, it's the best weapon for the moment that we're considering. So unlike the normal punch, which just comes straight out, this one is cutting across. Now, if you know your basic mathematics, when there's a circle and you have a point, let's say there's an X, pretend there's a circle here, and there's an X at the top of the circle, and there's one over here somewhere. There's two ways I can go from this X to that X. One is to follow the circle around, use the circumference, which is X amount of distance, or the other way is to cut across through the circle. It's called the chord, if I remember my maths correctly, as in C-H-O-R-D. And that distance is relatively shorter than following the circumference. Now that's what I'm applying here. My hand's in the wrong place, Ben's trying to get through here, I cut the circle. Now, I've now got Cham kill. I've got my bridge. May not have hit him yet, but I'm now in a position where I can cross the bridge and deal the first blow. If Ben is very unlucky to be throwing this punch, there's every chance he'll get smashed. He will get hit by that, and I won't even have to consider this one. The worst of that will be is like a club on the back of my head compared to boom, and he's getting hit full blast. But if I bring it up this way, he can knock it out. As soon as I turn the wrist, difference of energy. You feel it on your own? Just the subtle action of turning the hand, just a fraction of a distance, now he misses. So sometimes little things do matter. And this is a case in point. When I'm doing this one, that first punch cuts back at an angle, then I finish up with my regular punches, just as I did in the first one, and go back to the basic. Right, but if you've not done your wrist circling, you'll probably damage your own hand if you try to hit someone with that. So be careful when you're practicing on the bag, be careful, because if you hit it, it's just slightly off, you're going to sprain your wrist. So do it in slow motion a lot of times first, get used to it. And always be careful on the bag, because it's notorious, because of the shape, you can slip and slide. But of course you can't be practicing on your partners all the time, because they won't appreciate it. So you have to find a subtle in between. That's why the form is so good. It gives you a place to practice the motion without putting yourself at too much risk. And of course, it only occurs on the left-hand side of the form. No reason why you can't practice on the right-hand side. And as most of you are right-handers, you should expect that your right hand will be more accurate anyway. So the left hand's the one that needs the work. That's why there's only one side kick on the left leg, because you can probably do a reasonable one on your right leg already. I remember one Sifu was asked that at a seminar we did here in Melbourne. Why is there only a left foot side kick? Shouldn't you have one on the right? And he said, no real need, because he said on a wooden dummy, you do the same technique on both sides. And he said, and in any case, I've been training this, I think at the time he'd been training about 40 years or so. He said, I've been doing the left kick on the left foot kick for 40 years, and I still kick better on my right leg, because it was a natural right leg kick. So the form is not saying don't do this or don't do that, it's just saying you probably don't need to do that, because you can probably already do that. So it's working the things that you need to do. Thanks, Ben. And that's the end of the form. Has anyone got any questions? Because we'll probably come to an end at this point. So you can just play with each other for a little while, in a nice way, of course. All right, Chi-Sal, Pak-Sal, Lap-Sal, whatever you want to do. Hopefully I've answered more questions than I've posed. That's the point, the purpose. And thank you once again for turning up. It's been a good tour. It started off a bit slow, but it's been a very good day. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too.